Welcome to the session on Hollywood cinema. In this session on Introduction to Cinema, we are discussing about Hollywood cinema. Hollywood cinema, which is the other name of mainstream cinema of United States, continues to be the dominant factor in our film viewing experiences. Perhaps no other place on earth evokes such air of show business and glamour. Considering that Hollywood remains a suburb of Los Angeles, California, its reach and saturation remains global and its influence of global movie industry tremendous. The legend of Hollywood began in the early 20th century and is an earmark of modern American society, rich in history and innovation. Its dominant style, known as classical Hollywood cinema, developed from 1917 to 1960, characterizes most Hollywood films to this day. The first to realize the importance of business to movies, the American film industry has grossed more money every year than any other film industry in the world since the 1920s. The beginning. At the end of 19th century, the construction of Thomas Alva Edison's Black Maria, the first motion picture studio in the US, the American cinema can be said to have started. In its earliest days, New York was the center of filmmaking, with at least half a dozen of companies building studios and offering facilities for filmmaking. In early 1910, director David Griffith was sent by Biograph Company to the West Coast with his acting crew. They started filming on a vacant lot in downtown Los Angeles. This place was later named Hollywood. Griffith thus filmed the first ever movie shot in Hollywood. The film patent wars of the early 20th century led to the spread of film companies across the US. Then it was Edison who owned patents of movie making equipment, and he levied large fees from filmmakers. Many of them worked with equipment for which they did not even own the rights. Thus, filming in New York could be dangerous as it was close to Edison's company headquarters. At times, Edison's agents used to seize cameras which stalled their filmmaking. Before World War I, movies were made in several US cities, but filmmakers gravitated to Southern California as the industry developed. They were also attracted by mild climate, varied scenery in outdoor locations, and abundant sunlight of the place, which made it possible to film movies outdoor throughout the year. According to industry myth, the first movie made in Hollywood after shifting to studios was Cecil B. DeMille's The Score Man in 1914, when its director decided to shoot in Los Angeles at the last minute. There were several starting points for American cinema, but it was D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation that pioneered the filming vocabulary that is still in use. By the 1920s, Hollywood had transformed the face of American cinema and all the glamour it could come to embody. The arrival of sound added the immense success of the first sound film, The Jazz Singer, boosted the growth of Hollywood film industry. The birth of movie stars who had huge fan following was boosted with the arrival of notable filmmakers like Ernest Lubitsch, Alfred Hitchcock, Fritz Lang, and Jean Renoir. Hollywood thus became the birthplace of movie studios, which were of great importance to America's public image in movie industry. The earliest and most affluent film companies who set up their activities with their own studios in Hollywood were Warner Brothers Pictures, Paramount, RKO, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and 20th Century Fox. Universal, United Artists, and Columbia Pictures were also considered noteworthy. Despite not owning their own theaters, while Disney, Monogram, and Republic were considered third tier. The Golden Age and Studio Era. The years between 1930s and 1950s are considered as the golden age of Hollywood. A new era in filmmaking began in this decade with the introduction of sound. Most Hollywood films of the time resembled genres of comedy, musical, or melodrama. The same creative team often worked on films made by the same studio. The term studio system used here refers to the practice of large motion picture studios producing movies primarily on their own film making floors, with creative personnel under long-term contract. The big studios had either ownership or effective control of distribution and exhibition, which guaranteed additional sales of film tickets through manipulative booking techniques. This business model, known as vertical integration, meant that ownership and control of production, distribution and exhibition remained with the same studio. Each studio had its own style and characteristic touches, which made it possible to identify the films made on their banners. The major studios kept thousands of people, actors, producers, directors, writers, stuntmen, art directors and other technicians on fixed salary. As they owned hundreds of theatres in cities and towns across the nations, films had been churned out at regular intervals. At the height of popularity of motion pictures in mid-1940s, the studios were producing some 400 movies a year, which were seen by an audience of 90 million Americans per week. The movies that came out during this period till 1960 were called classical Hollywood. The classical Hollywood started a linear, logical narrative in 3-act structure. All these had a clear beginning, middle and end. They also followed the conventions like continuity editing and 3-point lighting. The narrative development in these films was motivated, that is, the events depicted followed a causal relationship maintaining the cinematic time and space. Some of the classics of the time include The Wizard of Oz, Gone with the Wind, Casablanca, Citizen Kane, A Streetcar Named Desire, A Place in the Sun, All About Eve and Rebecca, to name a few.
Here's Ruth Warwick, whom I know you love. Ruth.
Yesterday, the man who was willing to take her out of the dark alleys of New Orleans, the brute who...
Come on, let's find a break.
See, crossing you off my guest list. What are you doing here?
Dear Margot, you were an unforgettable.
Looking for me? Oh, I didn't make you jump, did I?
No, of course not. I didn't quite know who it was.
But in 1954, the operational link between major production studios and theatre chains was broken due to a court ruling against monopolization of the industry. Changing leisure patterns and social activity, notably with the advent of television to American homes and migration of families from the cities to the suburbs, also marked the end of the era of the studio system. After the studio era, by the 1950s, instead of traditional idealized portrayals of characters, filmmakers started creating tales of rebellion. This era saw the rise of films featuring darker plot lines and characters played by edgier stars like James Dean, Ava Gardner and Marilyn Monroe. Post-classical cinema is a term used to describe the changing methods of storytelling in Hollywood cinema from 1950s to the 1980s. New approaches in the storytelling like disorderly narrative patterns with plenty of flashbacks, storylines with twist endings and blurred lines between the antagonist and the protagonist were seen in the films of the times. The characteristics of post-classical storytelling may be seen in the noir film Rebel Without a Cause in 1955 and in Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho.
You're tearing me apart!
To adapt to the times when television started substituting cinema as a home entertainment medium, Hollywood began producing films for TV in order to compensate the money it was losing in movie theaters. This marked the entrance of Hollywood film industry to the television industry. Films like Bonnie and the Clyde, The Graduate, Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, In the Heat of the Night and Dr. Dolittle also signaled a change in Hollywood cinema. In the 1980s, films began to be made in a formulaic structure designed only for audience appeal. Out of these overly marketable films, very few made it to the list of classics. This decade is recognized for the introduction of high concept films. These films with central concepts offering an easy hook to marketers had little to do with actors or characters. Movies like Mars Attack, Ghostbusters, E.T., Jaws, Alien and Demon Seed could be easily described in 25 words or less and was marketable, understandable and culturally accessible due to its fresh themes. By the end of 1980s, it was generally recognized that films of that time were intended for audiences who sought simple entertainment. Many studios sought to capitalize on the advancement in special effects technology instead of taking risks on experimental or thought-provoking movies. The future of films looked uncertain as production cost increases and ticket collection continued to drop. Although the outlook was bleak, films such as Return of the Jedi, Terminator and Batman were met with unexpected success. Filmmakers like Francis Ford Coppola, George Lucas, Martin Scorsese, Roman Polanski and William Friedkin came to produce movies that paid homage to the history of film and developed upon existing genres and techniques. Due to the use of special effects, the budget of film production increased. To save money, more and more films started to launch production in overseas locations. Multinational industry conglomerates bought out many studios including Columbia and 20th Century Fox. Hollywood today. The drive to produce a spectacle on the movie screen has largely shaped American cinema ever since early days, and it continues even today in newer forms as 2000s have been an era of immense change in the movie and technology industries. In contemporary Hollywood cinema, there is now a package unit system at working. Studio space is rented out and personnel are hired for the duration of the one project. Individual producers now have to put together a one-off package of finance, personnel, equipment and studio time for each film being made. The studios no longer have to be concerned with keeping its spaces busy like a factory with full of workers permanently on their payroll. Instead, arrangements can be made to film each movie wherever it is most convenient around the world, perhaps in places where rates of pay are considerably lower. The main Hollywood companies were driven to this system in an effort to cut expenditure. Actors and directors in the new Hollywood have agents to cut deals for them. Some directors like Steven Spielberg and James Cameron and actors like Johnny Depp and Tom Cruise have arguably more power than the studios. Studios started focusing on a handful of a successful blockbuster will attract an audience large enough to offset production costs and reap considerable profits. Added to that, in the new films, short duration has gotten shorter. Contemporary films have more action and movement than earlier films. And finally, films have gotten shorter. The median length of top 100 successful films between 1994 and 2015 was 110 minutes. The long films now are historical and Western films, and the short ones are animation films and documentaries, which has also recently found success in the theatres. After the success of blockbusters like Titanic, Independence Day, Back to the Future, Beverly Hills Cop, Top Gun, Wall Street, Rain Man, The Matrix, The Green Mile, The Sixth Sense, Star Wars, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, Silence of the Lambs, Forrest Gump and Schindler's List is a final quarter of the 20th century. The successful films of 21st century are largely based on fantasy, special effects, war, horror of science fiction. A number of original science fiction movies from Hollywood like Gravity and Interstellar turned out to be its instant hits with their gripping visuals and storytelling methods. Sequels, reboots, franchises, superhero sagas, action flicks and such big budget blockbusters were the in thing for Hollywood. Just take the hit lineup of the past 10 years. Transformers, Avengers, Star Wars, Dark Knight, Pirates of the Caribbean, The Wolverine, 300 Rise of an Empire, the list is endless. In Hollywood today, bigger is the better and repeatability is the king. According to the Box Office Mojo, a website that tracks ticket sales, the 10 top grossing movies worldwide in recent times were animated films like Frozen, Minions, Ice Age, Shriek, Toy Story and Lion King. All the above is not to say that the last decade has not been good for filmmakers who preferred personal films over spectacles like Avatar and Hugo. As big studios avoided small films, it has never been easy to produce and distribute a feature film completely outside the studio system. They use newer, cheaper digital technologies to produce great images and sound in films like The Revenant, Boyhood and Little Miss Sunshine.
Dwayne, that's your name, right? Are you getting any? My God, man.
The independent productions focused on small budgets and emphasized high professional quality in terms of acting, directing, screenwriting and other elements associated with production, and also upon creativity and innovation in storytelling. These movies usually rely upon good write-ups or niche marketing to garner an audience. Directors like Quentin Tarantino, Steven Spielberg, Richard Linklater and Coen brothers had considerable financial successes, thereby re-establishing the commercial viability of independent films. The surprise success from independent banners including films like Passion of the Christ, Slumdog Millionaire, My Big Fat Greek Wedding, Burn After Reading, Erin Brockovich, Ocean's 11, Juno and Memento, foreign language films such as Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Hero and documentary films like Super Size Me, March of the Penguins and Michael Moore's Bowling of Columbine and Fahrenheit 9/11. As the smaller productions found considerable success harvesting 20% of the total revenues, today's big 6 major studios have created a number of subsidiaries. They are designed to develop less commercial, more character-driven films which appeal to the growing art house market. These include New Line Cinema, HBO Films, DreamWorks, Sony Pictures Classics, Fox Searchlight Pictures, Miramax Films, Warner Independent Pictures, Paramount Classics or Paramount Vintage, 3 Star Films and Kendrick Brothers Productions. By the late 2000s, Hollywood produces 3 different classes of films. First one, the big budget blockbusters. Second, the art films, specialty films and niche market films produced by the conglomerate-owned independent banners. And the third, genre and specialty films coming from truly independent studios and producers. The third category now comprises half the feature films released in the United States, each produced at a cost between $5 to $10 million. Globalization and big blockbusters. Most recently, in the line with the globalization trend, the United States government has been actively promoting free trade on cultural products. Hollywood got the advantage of this action and became a worldwide cultural source. The fantasy films like Lord of the Rings, Harry Potter series and Jungle Book find audience everywhere across the globe. There is also continued interest in the superhero genre Batman and Superman from DC Comics and films based on Marvel Comics brand such as Spider-Man, X-Men. In fact, the highest paid Hollywood directors like Peter Jackson, David Yates and Michael Bay are specialists in this genre. The use of English language enhances the cost of production. There has been a boom in American multinational media corporations which has a unique ability to make big budget films that appeal to popular taste in many different cultures. But Hollywood cinema is largely male dominated with only less than 10% of films made by women directors. Though they steal the limelight with their acting prowess and glamour elements, women are more likely to be seen as directors, writers, producers, executive producers, editors and cinematographers in independently produced documentaries than in narrative feature films. Adaptability of the film industry. Perhaps the key to understanding the success of Hollywood cinema over the past 100 years lies in recognizing the way in which it has always demonstrated an incredible ability to adapt to changing business circumstances. At heart, the mainstream American film industry has always recognized that what it is offering the public is a product and that its success depends on adapting that product to a constantly changing market. Hollywood has also continually managed to find ways of embracing new technologies. The turn of the millennium saw remarkable changes in movie technology. The big 8 studios of the classic era have changed their ownership. For example, Japanese business major Sony has taken over Columbia Pictures, which had big success recently with Skyfall, Men in Black and Karate Kid. Universal Pictures, which is now a part of media conglomerate NBC Universal, holds a big market share with hit films like Jurassic World, Minions, Furious 7 and Despicable Me. While RKO Pictures has become defunct, MGM is now active. Among the other 6, Paramount is now owned by Viacom, while Warner Brothers is owned by Time Warner. The latter has been particularly successful with back-to-back hits like The Hobbit, Desolation of the Smog, Gravity, Men of Steel, the Harry Potter series, the Superman series, the Matrix series and Star Wars series. New studios like Buena Vista and Lionsgate also have taken shares in the big studios. Eyeing a worldwide market, Hollywood cinema makes fantasy-oriented films for a teenage audience. The movie industry has already adapted technological innovations like Blu-ray disc and IMAX theaters. Movies can now be watched on smartphones, tablets, computers and other personal devices with the advent of streaming services such as Netflix. Social media has created new opportunities for movie consumption in settings most people would never have guessed a few years back. Last year, for example, Warner Bros. Started digitally renting movies on Facebook for the first time. The movie marketing arena has almost completely shifted to the social media and internet sites which have a large reach around the world. Hollywood cinema has also taken initiatives to bring to the fore stars from other booming film industries from across the world for its productions. Jackie Chan, Tony Jaa and Aishwarya Rai were thus brought to Hollywood. Directors like John Woo from Hong Kong and Manoj Night Shyamalan made a name in Hollywood. The studios are careful to seed films with actors, locations and occasionally languages that are well known in target countries. Sony cites the foreign success of The Green Hornet with its Taiwanese hero and an Austrian-German villain and Resident Evil Afterlife with a Japanese location as evidence of that strategy. The rapid expansion of Chinese and Indian film market and somewhat unusual barriers to entry to these markets are now compelling Hollywood industry to channelize resources into overseas production. China currently allows 34 foreign film releases in the country on an annual basis, while co-productions and movies produced exclusively in China face less restrictions. The major film studios are forming new partnerships with Chinese companies and building production studios in the country to gain better access to the world's fastest growing film market. Big hits of 2015 like Furious 7 and Jurassic World were the result of co-productions with Chinese companies. An increasing number of films are likely to be made under similar conditions tailored to suit a global audience. Similar in the case in India, where Hindi films are now produced with Hollywood banners. The superior global marketing machinery and the ability to anticipate foreign taste has made Hollywood cinema dominating the global market. With an inherent capacity to adapt to the changing audience tastes, Hollywood is sure to remain the entertainment headquarters of the world. Now it's time to summarize the session. Hollywood is an umbrella term used for American movie industry centered in suburbs of Los Angeles, California. The movie industry and large film studios moved to this place largely to avoid patent fees of movie making equipment owned by Thomas Alva Edison. By the second half of 1920s, all the big studios started operating from here. Plenty of sunshine and diversity of locations also contributed to this shift. With the arrival of sound film, the industry made many leaps. The period between 1930 and 1960 was called the Golden Age of Hollywood when classical Hollywood films came out. The studios also gained vertical integration across the industry with their own production and distribution systems. Actors, scriptwriters and technicians were on the payroll of studios which produced films and exhibited in their own theatres. More than 400 films were made thus every year. But the studio system began to fade out with a court ruling against monopolization. Arrival of television in American households added to the decline. Hollywood then survived with productions for television. By the 1990s, Hollywood cinema started gaining a worldwide audience. It paid more attention to fantasy films, science fiction films and action-oriented films which had marketed all over the world. Major studios were later taken over by media conglomerates from around the world and by Japanese companies like Sony. Hollywood cinema still retains its charm as the #1 entertainment provider by adapting to the taste of the worldwide audience with their innovative products. Before we move on to the next section, please try to answer the following questions. First question: watch a Hollywood film and an independently made American film and see what all things that they share in common and how different they are from each other. Check whether they are made in 3-act structure. Also study how the characters of the protagonist are constructed. Second question: what is classical Hollywood cinema? And the third: what were the advantages of Hollywood for film making? Books for your references are Cinema Studies, The Key Concepts by Hayward Susan, Routledge, New York. Film Art and Introduction by Bordwell and Kristen Thompson D., McGraw-Hill, New York. Essential Cinema and Introduction to Film Analysis by Louis J., Wadsworth Senage, Boston. The Film Experience and Introduction by Patricia White and Corrigan T., Bedford, St. Martin's, Boston. Movies About the Movies, Hollywood Reflected by Christopher and Amnes, University Press of Kentucky. Movie Made America, A Cultural History of American Movies by Robert Starr, Vintage, New York. Hope this session about Hollywood cinema was useful to you. See you next time. Until then, goodbye.